So Japan recently had a 5,000 player major event, and the cards from our upcoming prismatic evolution set were already legal. Unfortunately, out of the entire top 16, we only saw 3 cards from the new set, and one of them was just a Mincino, so that could really be any Mincino. So that leaves only 2 cards that were actually impactful from the new set, one being Bidoof, a baby Pokemon with 30 hit points. It has a free attack that does 10 damage and item locks, and it also has free retreat, which is very nice. This card can be very helpful for slower setup decks to kind of slow the game down to their pace of play, and it does seem like Bidoof had an impact on the meta. This also could just be a Japan having a different meta kind of thing, but a lot of the decks we see in the top 16 are either built to deal with Bidoof or decks that already have a decent time into it. Like, of course, Dragapult is the deck playing Bidoof, but they're playing Lance to get their evolutions without item cards. We saw Grand Tree, more middle evolutions, TM Evos, and even like a Miraidon deck playing research and stuff like that to not be so reliant on items. So overall, I don't think Bidoof is too much to worry about. It does seem that most decks will be able to adapt and just be built a bit differently to handle not being able to play so many item cards. The only other new card we saw was this Regigigas that has an attack for 4 colorless that does 100 damage plus 230 more damage if you're attacking into a Terra Pokemon, so this is pretty great, and specifically Lugia against like Dragapult and Charizard. While we didn't see any new archetypes, we did see 2 unexpected decks meet in the finals, being Archaludon EX with Dialga V-Star versus Ancient Box. So not only is it 2 unexpected decks, but the actual game is quite interesting as well. So I'm going to kind of go into the game, and instead of just watching the whole game, I'm just going to break down the important turns and like point out what could have been done different. Also, I'm not claiming to be better than either of these players. It is just much easier to know the right plays when you're not playing in front of thousands of people and watching at home. And I just wanted to say thank you so much to this absolute legend, and shout out to the channel members. Thank you so much, I greatly appreciate it. So neither player got a very explosive start. The Archaludon player starts the game with a Dialga V in the active facing down a Greninja. He nest balls for his own Greninja, uses it, and passes the turn. Doesn't choose to Ultra Ball for a Duraludon. Kind of an interesting choice. I think I would have liked to see him get a Duraludon down to get ready to attack, but either way, he passes to the Ancient player, who starts his turn with an Earthen Vessel to discard a Fluttermane, to grab 2 Dark Energies to then use Greninja, and off the Greninja he sees a Brilliant Blender, which is a pretty perfect card to see. Now, I think his only choice is whether to use Brilliant Blender or Pokestop first, but he does decide to use a Pokegear before either, which is an interesting choice. I think maybe he thinks the Archaludon player is bricking, so he doesn't want to put the Pokestop in play, but using the Brilliant Blender before the Pokegear would probably be ideal. It would increase your odds to hit a supporter by quite a bit. He does grab a Boss off the Pokegear and uses the Blender to get rid of 3 Fluttermane, a Great Tusk, and a Roaring Moon to grab back with Stretcher, and Sada is used to put an energy on the Roaring Moon. I think the ideal order for this turn would have been start with Vessel like he did and then use Greninja, but after that, I think Pokestop is the best thing to use next, because really you're just trying to discard ancient Pokemon, and ideally we would get 2 Dark Energy into the discard and find a way to find 2 Roaring Moon to put on the bench to get the full value out of Sada, and then based off what is hit off the Pokestop would decide what to get rid of off of the Blender. Like maybe if we hit a Nest Ball off of the Pokestop but not a Dark Energy, then we would discard 3 random ancient cards, a Roaring Moon, and a Dark Energy, so that we could Stretcher back the Roaring Moon and then Sada for 2 Dark onto both of our Moon. And then we would just hold the Pokegear for later in the game when we actually need it. But anyway, after our Ancient player uses the Sada, he ends up attaching the basic Dark Energy to the Greninja for turn, and then plays the Pokestop and uses it. Perfect sequencing would have been to attach the Dark Energy after the Pokestop, but I don't really think he was planning on giving the Pokestop to the Arc player, so that's why he kind of did it out of order like that, which happens to the best of us. But if he did hold the attachment, he could have used the Nest Ball to get Pecharunt to attack with the Roaring Moon, even though I'm not really sure if putting a 2-prizer in play at this point in the game is worth it. And then he plays a Nest Ball that he hit off Pokestop and passes over to the Archaludon player, who starts off by using Greninja for 2, and now he's looking at a 9-card hand trying to figure out what to discard off of Vessel and Ultra Ball. He ends up using the Vessel and the Ultra Ball to grab a Duraludon. The Dialga V in the active is evolved from hand, a basic metal is attached to the bench, and Iono is played. I think there is an argument to not evolve the Dialga in the active and attach to that and use Dialga's first attack to accelerate 2 metal from the discard to it. He was most likely worried about it getting 1-shot next turn, and that is a very valid concern. I do think this is a rough matchup for Arcaladon, so taking some risks might be necessary, but our Arcaladon player has a whole nother plan in mind that we'll see in a bit. After Iono, Nestball grabs a second Duraludon, Jamming Tower bumps the Pokestop, and the turn is passed. The Ancient player starts off with Greninja for 2, Ultra Balls away a couple Ancient cards to grab a Great Tusk to discard off a Vessel. Then Greninja is retreated before using Sada. This is one of the rare occasions where retreating first is correct because he needed the second energy in the discard pile to get the full value from Sada. A third and fourth Moon are benched off of Nestball and Stretcher. Then the Pokestop is used, unfortunately Boss is discarded. Then he spreads the energy further with his attachment for turn and attacks into the active for 210. I would have liked to see him hold the Stretcher and only bench one extra Moon, and then use the attachment for turn to build a backup Moon. It does make sense why he spread the energy like that. He's thinking next turn when he uses Sada, he can attach one energy to each of the Moons with the attachment already on it. But I think having a backup fully built up Moon would just be ideal, and there are still 2 good targets for Sada for next turn. But anyway, now the Dialga has 210 damage on it, and our Arcaladon player starts the turn by taking a really long think. He then counts his opponent's deck and plays an Iono, deciding not to play the Ultra Ball in his hand to get an Arcaladon to evolve, and then off Iono draws into another Ultra Ball, still doesn't play it, and passes the turn. Now this is kind of a weird situation because even with the 3 energy on the Dialga, it does not knock out Roaring Moon with the booster capsule, so I'm not 100% sure what is correct here, but I think I would have gone for the Dialga's V-Star attack, Star Chronos. I would have Ultra Balled for a Arcaladon, evolved it, put both energy on the active, and then hope to hit another Arcaladon and an attachment for turn off the Iono, which he would have hit, and then hopefully next turn you would Turo up the damaged Dialga and attack with an Arcaladon, hoping to be able to tank a hit. So you would need a lot because you need a backup Duraludon on the bench for next turn, but being behind this much versus a single prize deck can be really hard to come back from. The turn is passed over to the Ancient player, who starts off with an Explorer's Guidance and hits a combination of 4 cards that he would really like to keep. He ends up choosing the Palpad and Superior Energy Retrieval. I think this is the right choice, but he did have to ditch the Vessel that he would have liked to keep along with the Professor Sada. Then he just takes a KO on the Dialga, never hitting the Pokestop. Overall, I think this turn is fine. There's not really much to do other than attack, and his deck is really thin at this point, so not hitting the Pokestop is reasonable. The Arcaladon player promotes the Duraludon with the energy, Ultra Balls for Fezandipity, uses it, and then is forced to just hit for 30. It's hard to tell if he was actually planning to attack this turn, because after he Ultra Balled for Fez, he didn't have another way to grab an Arcaladon. I'm not too sure about this. I think just Ultra Balling for the Arcaladon and attacking was overall fine. In my experience against Ancient Box, it's really best to start attacking as soon as possible so that it increases the odds that you're able to tank a hit, especially with a deck like Arcaladon that plays 2 Turo and a Scoop Up Cyclone, so you'd really like to be able to tank a hit and heal. But other than that, our Arcaladon player chooses not to play Supporter from hand, which is also interesting because he did have access to a Turo, so he could have picked up the Fez, which I think would have been worthwhile, because if the Ancient player is able to just build up a second attacker and boss up the Fezandipity and knock it out, I don't really see a way that Arcaladon can win this game. So I think all that our Ancient player needs to do is find a boss's order and build up a backup attacker. He decides to retreat the active Roaring Moon to be able to get back the energy with Superior Energy Retrieval, and then uses one of them to draw with Greninja. He strangely does not play the Palpad beforehand, but it's fine because he does have a Pokegear in hand to get boss's order guaranteed if he wants. But after using Greninja, he decides to Dark Patch to build a second Moon with a single energy on it, attaches to the active, Palpad's back in Sada and a boss, and just takes the knockout. I'm not too sure what he's worried about, but he seems to be hesitant to fully build up a backup attacker and didn't seem to want to boss the Fez, which I do think that would have put him in an almost unlosable situation. But I could definitely be missing something because I'm just here talking about the game while he was playing in the finals of a 5,000 person tournament. He might be worried about decking out or maybe overextending his resources, but I think spreading the energy too thin is kind of overextending them by accident from trying not to overextend, if that makes sense. But either way, he takes the knockout and goes down to 3 prizes. Our Arcaladon player doesn't really do much this turn. He just draws with Fez, benches another Duraludon, and Turos up the Fez and then passes the turn. He definitely could have attacked this turn. He has an Arcaladon in hand and an Ultra Ball, I believe. I think throwing up the Fez is pretty ideal. He does seem to want to be able to Iono his opponent to 1 before starting to attack, but I think the sooner that he starts attacking the better, but he does just end up passing the turn over. The Ancient player just draws and attacks. That's all he really can do at this point. He's got 4 energy in play, 2 prize, and 1 is stuck in the deck, so can't really attach or draw with Greninja. Also, there's not really any playable cards in hand or any cards worth thinning, so just taking the knockout is all that can really be done. The Arcaladon player just bosses up a Roaring Moon with no energy on it and passes the turn. This is a good idea. It's forcing the Ancient player to have to put Petront in play to be able to attack again, and Ancient having a 2-prize Pokemon in play is always going to be better for the Arcaladon player. This would have been ideal if he could have done this a few turns ago, because we'd really like to see him attacking by now, but he is making the best out of the situation that he's in. And just based off of this game, this does seem like this player prefers to take the safe route and doesn't really take too many risks while playing, even though taking risks can be important at times, especially in a bad matchup. Our Ancient player ends up top decking Petront for turn, benches it, uses it to switch into the active, and takes the knockout. He did end up getting an energy off of his prizes last turn, so I really would have liked to see him attach that to one of the moons with a single energy on it, but that does not end up happening, and he just goes down to a single prize. Now this is the turn that our Arcaladon player has been waiting for. With just a lone Duraludon in play, he Palpads back in 2 Iono, benches the Fezandipity, and uses it. He ends up drawing into an Iono off of the Fez, and then uses 3 Night Stretcher to grab back a basic energy and 2 Duraludon. The 2 Duraludon along with the Dialga V get benched, the active is evolved into Arcaladon, 2 energies are accelerated to it, along with a hand attachment. The Jamming Tower he's been holding for several turns now bumps the Pokestop, and Iono is played. He takes his first prize and just misses the Scoop Up Cyclone that's stuck in the prizes. The Ancient player debates promoting Greninja for turn, but decides to promote the Damage Roaring Moon. He top decks Sada, which is fair enough. The deck was really thin and he had really good odds to draw a basic energy or a Sada. He uses it to accelerate an energy to the active and to build another Roaring Moon with a single energy on it. Ultimately decides to use Petront to put one of the single energy moons into the active and pass the turn. Now I really think the Ancient player probably should have attacked this turn, and if they had hand attached a couple turns ago, I'm pretty sure that he could have ended up with 3 Roaring Moons with 2 energies each on them. And in that scenario, I really don't think the Arcaladon player could have ended up winning, but I guess the Ancient player is thinking that next turn he's just going to attach to whatever moon is not knocked out and either boss up the Fezandipity or knock out the Dialga V-Star or something like that. But if you were to hit into the active and also have a Roaring Moon on the bench with 2 energy, the Arc player would be forced to retreat into a fresh Arcaladon and attack with that, or use the Dialga next turn and retreat the active. But either way, not attacking just leaves the Arcaladon player with way too many options. And also by not doing this, you're letting him pretty freely knock out the Petront, whereas if multiple moons were built up, he'd be forced to deal with as many of the threats as possible. And there's a good chance the Arcaladon player will play an Iono next turn. He did Palpad 2 of them back in, and now we're going to have to find Boss and a hand attachment off the Iono, whereas if all 3 moons had 2 energy on them, just Boss would lead to a win. I know some people don't like to factor in nerves when it comes to stream matches like this, but I know personally if that was me, playing in the finals of this 5,000 player tournament with so many people watching, nerves would definitely be a factor, and I don't know if I would play to my best. But anyway, the Ancient player just ends up passing with the Roaring Moon in the active. The Arcaladon player draws, evolves into 2 more Arcaladons, putting 4 energies on his Dialga V, counter catchers up the Petront and Ionos. He KOs the Petront and takes pretty much perfect cards off the prize cards, being a Scoop Up Cyclone and a Boss's Order. And we see not having any damage on the active Arcaladon let him play completely differently in attaching the 4 energy to the Dialga and also not being forced to retreat. The Ancient player still has decent odds to draw something like a basic Dark Energy and drawing into a Pokegear or Boss to boss up the Dialga for game. He decides to promote Greninja, so that's not possible, but the 2 cards drawn are dead anyway. The Arcaladon player draws Ultra Balls for a Dialga V-Star, Scoop Up Cyclones the active, bosses up the Roaring Moon with 2 energy, and uses the V-Star attack to knock it out. For some reason, he chooses not to bench the Duraludon again, making his board at least slightly weaker, meaning that he does not have the option to attack with an Arcaladon next turn, but he does have a Turo in hand, so I guess he doesn't have to worry about something getting bossed into the active. So the V-Star attack is used, the Ancient player promotes another Roaring Moon, and that is also knocked out with the Dialga V-Star. I'm guessing the Ancient players doing enough damage at this point to knock out the Dialga or an Archaludon. Otherwise, I would have thought that the Archaludon player would have made it a point to use the Archaludon EX to attack this turn instead of the Dialga. But anyway, he attacks, and the Ancient player top decks a Munkidori and is forced to just pass again, allowing for the Archaludon player to attack and take his final prize. I think the Ancient player might have just started overthinking things at the end of the game, because I think he definitely could have won by just setting up multiple attackers and attacking. Possibly the Archaludon player passing all those turns made the Ancient player think he was going for like a deck out strategy or something like that. Maybe he got nervous and didn't want to commit energy or something. I'm not really too sure. Either way, it was an interesting game, and both players kind of took an interesting strategy at some point of just deciding not to attack and passing, which sometimes is the correct play, but I don't know that it was in these situations. I think it was mainly the Archaludon player getting off to a really awkward start and choosing not to attack those couple turns that ended up leading to this game playing out so strangely. But either way, it was a look into our future format, and I thought it was an interesting game to kind of break down. Hope you all enjoyed. Like or dislike, comment, and subscribe. Take care and have a good one.